My greatest opponent is me, Michael Fessler. You're my harshest critic. There are dreams and lofty goals that I'm striving for, but you constantly plant seeds of doubt in my mind. It's been a roller coaster since day one. Even though the highs have been many, the lows have been deep. And when I fall into the valley of despair, it gets harder each time to find my way out. I hate the valley. You're loudest when I'm in it, pestering and whispering regret into my ear. So many times you've told me to quit. It's not worth it, you say. Greatness is only for the strong and determined. You remind me of my past failures and suggest that history is doomed to repeat itself. You're not just a critic, you're an opponent. When I'm tired, you advise me to rest. When I'm in pain, you encourage me to give in. And when I don't think I can go any farther, you tell me to stop as you coddle me and disparage my ambitions. You instill fear in me, fear of failure and the unbearable weight of disappointment and emotional anguish it holds. You cause me to be timid rather than courageous, stagnant instead of zealous. But I want you to know that I'm on to you. From now on, every doubt will be combated with optimism, every uncertainty replaced with hope. Every failure will be marked with a mental sign that reads, "Lesson learned." My failures will no longer define me, but will only serve as obstacles in the way of success. And your vision of success leads to emptiness. So I'm redefining it. I'm not in this sport for reason of personal glory or self-worth. I'm in it because I love it. I'm in it because I want to realize my potential. I'm in it because I know that the journey in striving for greatness is worth it. It's worth every drop of blood, sweat, and tears. For I know that I am stronger, wiser, and more ambitious on account of the dedication and hard work I put into the pursuit of victory. When I am tired, I will ignore your appeal for rest. When I am in pain, when my body aches and burns and yearns to quit, I will stay the course. And when I don't think I can go any farther, I will dig deep within my soul and push even harder. Because the truth is that I would rather fall in the course of giving it my all than quit and wonder what could have been. I don't fear failure. I fear a life that never took any worthwhile risks. I am a wrestler. I am a warrior. The battles on the mat are preparation for the battles I may face in life, and I will be victorious. You see, my greatest opponent isn't the competitor standing right in front of me. My greatest opponent is me.
Welcome back, guys. This is the second video in our or a four-part series, I should say, on wrestling and the lessons that we've learned from wrestling, how they've contributed to our lives into adulthood, and what influence they've had over us positively. So this video, Christian started out with an excerpt from a blog that he read. I'll let him notate the author, and if you sit and listen to that writing, to me, it was a little bit emotionally invoking, right? I mean, that's what I perceive as a man writing his internal dialogue to himself for the public to read, which is valiant in itself, right? Because most people don't really want to broadcast what's really going on in their brain. But I mean, I think that we want to lead into the fact that wrestling is a very, very outwardly physical sport. But really the nuts and bolts of it, the difference between people that are successful and not successful in the long-term wrestling world and business and life in general, is those people that can effectively navigate not just the superficial version of what people see, i.e. in wrestling, the physical aspect, but the mental fortitude and the mental endurance that it takes, mental strength to combat those challenges, overcome those challenges, become better. So I'll let you start. You could notate that author, make a few reference points on that blog if you want for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's Michael Fessler is the name. He's an author of multiple books. God, Wrestler is one of them. Faith in Wrestling is another one. They all have the same general theme. And what he's doing is exactly what you just said. It's a very valiant approach. most people are not vulnerable enough to dictate or write what they're feeling inside. It's really a huge problem in the world today is mental health issues and the things that are behind the curtain, the Oz running things inside of your brain. And I think that he does a great job of explaining the true battle that wrestling actually gives to you. So, Joe Rogan talks about it constantly on his podcast. He continually says every time that he has a wrestler on or he's talking about fighting, he's a UFC announcer, he's a UFC, or not a UFC fighter, but an MMA fighter himself, trains like a madman, but he talks about how wrestling is the hardest sport on the planet. Now, if you look at like statistics and you look at research, physiology research or sports, sports medicine research, they say that the two hardest sports in terms of the anaerobic aerobic capacity are wrestling and water polo, right? Wrestling, two people of equivalent stature, legitimately giving 100% effort, every ounce of effort, every muscle fiber, everything continually engaged for an entirety of whether you get it 3 minutes or whether you're in college it's 7 minutes, and then plus in the overtime periods and stuff like that. It is a true test of not only your physically. I guess I'm just trying to write that down. I'm saying that the physical, being the hardest sport in the world, is not the biggest battle on the mat. The biggest battle on the mat is the critic inside your mind, right? And one of the reasons that I made that note in the last video that we made in this series about how there's an intrinsic respect for a wrestler, that's really what I'm talking about. It's not that they're okay with doing something hard. And a lot of people, when necessity comes up or survival comes up or whatever it is, the sport that they do happens to be extremely physically enduring or whatever it is, most people will give enough to make it through. Survival, you have to, right. Necessity on the other sides. But there's a lot of people who will be able to survive lots of different things. The critic inside your head will dictate how long of a tenure you have in a wrestling room. And that's that. When I said, I judge people, I guess maybe is a harsh thing to say, but I judge their tenure because I'm judging how long they were able to silence the critic inside their head. Right. So maybe that's a good point to start off with, in your time as an extreme sports athlete. You've had, you do wrestling, you've done, you enduro or not enduro, you do enduro, dirt biking. God, I don't know why I'm having such a hard time coming up with words. Powerlifting. You like to challenge yourself. How have you personally silenced the critic in your head through those endeavors?
It's funny that you mentioned that. I have a very tangible single moment in my life when I was a junior in high school, where my wrestling coach looked at me and said something to me that dictated everything that I did athletically in the future. And I had just come off of, I think at that point for that season, I think I was 14-0, and I was a little bit egotistical. And I was talking to him about state championships. The high school that I went to was regarded as a very athletically prominent school, gigantic school. There was 2,800 kids there. But we had, between all sports, male and female, we had something like 157 state championships. So they had it painted up on the wall inside the auditorium, all the years that every sport had won state championships. And when I was in high school there, we were like 9 years running for baseball, 4 years running for football, 11 years running for soccer, and then I think 3 years running for wrestling. And it comes with some pressure, but I mean, as a junior in high school, you really only focus individually. You're not really thinking that much at that time about like your impact on the people around you. But I went up to my coach and I said, "Hey, Bo, I'm going to win state this year." And he turned around and he was sitting at his desk. He had like this red vinyl computer chair that I swear was from like 1965, right? And his office in the wrestling room was basically a closet, right? And he turned around and he looked, and he had like this stone-walled look on his face. And I thought that when I said that, he would be like, yeah, you know, great goal. Mm-hmm. And he turned around, and he looked at me, and he said, imagine how good you'd be if you actually tried. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what? He said, just think about that. Have a good night. And I thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. It genuinely didn't really hit me until I was competitive in powerlifting, right? Because at that time in that sport, there's literal fractions of percentages that will differentiate you from the best in the nation to the best in the world. And I had I guess you could say my character flaw in my late teens, early adolescence was, you could say, resting on my laurels, right? Like I was like, I'm good, mm-hmm. but I'm not great, but I'm okay with being good, mm-hmm. or really good, but not great, because mm-hmm. great is cool, but you know, I don't necessarily feel like putting in the extra 5% effort to be great. And I remember I was in North Carolina, sitting in a squat rack, and my coach at that time, Travis, came up to me and he said, there's 90 pounds between where you are and being ranked third in the world at what you're doing right now. And he said, I need more out of you. And all I could remember was Bo saying, imagine how good you'd be if you really tried. And from that point, I mean, I think that for me, it was really, I'd pushed my body in high school to the absolute limit. I pushed my body in powerlifting to the absolute limit. The only thing that was keeping me from going from being good to being great was my mind, mm-hmm. purely my mind. And for me, if we're like referencing the 7 deadly sins, right? The only thing that I was battling was sloth. It was just pure laziness, mm-hmm. right? Of like, why do I not want to do this? Because it's hard, you know, and it's just a little bit more uncomfortable than what I'm doing now. And I don't really want to be that uncomfortable for this, mm-hmm. this reward. And it was at that time I literally went and got tattooed on my arm, no half measures, right? Because it's like, if you're going to do something, do it all the way. And for me, that means that statement on my arm is a very close tribute to that statement from Bo of, if you're going to like, imagine how good you'd be if you tried hard, mm-hmm. right? And I only look at that statement now as an adult as, imagine how good you'd be if you invested mentally what you invested physically. Mm-hmm. To me, that's all that meant, was like, I'd reached my physical cap, and the only way for me to keep growing was to tackle the mental cap, mm-hmm. right? And stop listening to the critic in my head, or the weak little brain, or part of my brain that's like, no, you should be comfortable. This is hard. You don't need to do this, right? But it fueled me, but not necessarily in the most, I guess, fluent way when I was younger after he told me that. But it really started to click when I was, 22, 23, 24. But I always wondered, how much better would I have been then if I really let that click then, mm-hmm. right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like it was what you needed to change, or what your coach Bo was referring to was the discipline.
Yeah.
Right. You show up to the wrestling room, but are you forcing yourself to go to bed at 9 o'clock?
Right.
You forcing yourself to get a morning workout, blow your lungs out, as the coaches say it.
Yeah.
Are you forcing yourself to eat the proper proportions, or are you overindulging on the weekends and cutting and fasting and ending up weak at the tournament and so on and so forth? You made weight, but you're weak as shit.
Right.
There's an extreme amount of discipline that's required to compete in the sport, and that's really the key difference between success and mediocrity. I think, is how disciplined somebody is.
Mm-hmm.
Jocko Willink talks about that
Mm-hmm.
constantly. And he has some great speeches about discipline correlating to freedom,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds completely asinine. It's completely counterintuitive to what the general world thinks, right? It's like, how is having a disciplined life where you structure your everything that you do around whatever the goal is that you want to achieve, meaning you don't get to indulge in this, you don't get to have this fun, you don't get to have free reign to your time, and so on and so forth. And you just don't get to be what the world would call happy, right? So that you can achieve freedom. It doesn't make any fucking sense, right?
I mean, most
to cuss too much.
Yeah,
but
I mean, most people look at that as the antithesis of freedom.
exactly. But when you actually boil it down and you look at it, we talk about this with the guys in Pride all the time, is looking at it with a career mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really trip most people's trigger until they have some kind of, I don't know, some kind of come into Jesus moment, I suppose it would be, as like, am I going to do this career for a lifetime, or am I just here because this was the next best thing in my path that I don't even understand? But it's like, when you start to look at the goal at its furthest most point, where is the farthest you want to achieve? What you have to fix are the micro details
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning before you can get to the end, right? And so discipline, the size of your discipline level equals the size of your success and your freedom level. I think that we all probably should do quite a bit of investigation into, do we know what those goals and those ambitions or the things we want to succeed are in? And if we know what those are we actually disciplining ourselves to do it, or is it just a dream?
Right.
A dream without action, or a goal without action, is a dream.
Yeah.
Right. So you're missing the discipline. For me, silencing the critic came with a lot of ups and downs in my childhood. I think a lot of it was innate inside of me. Certain discipline factors were innate inside of me. My parents were a key proponent for me in my will to win and my discipline to not quit. It was very, it's not a overly rough childhood. I'm not going to make it sound like it was worse than it was, but we weren't swimming in money, right? And wrestling was an easy sport for me to get into because all you needed was shoes, right? It's not like you needed a $700 get up so you can get out on the ice and check people and stuff like that, and then get it again the next year because you've grown 4 inches. Wrestling was easy to get into. But our family, there was 4 kids. My parents were stressed to the brim, managing that. My father worked multiple jobs at any given time. And it was very clear that if you were going to do this, you were not going to quit. Right. Now, you could quit after the season was over, but you were not going to quit until the season was over. You spend the time, you commit. So that was ingrained into me at a young age, is that you don't stop in the middle of something. So that was I'm very thankful that was part of that upbringing. But I know a mental shift for me happened during, it is a key time in my life for sure. My parents' divorce. There was a time period. It was at the end of my 7th grade year. I had wrestled since 2nd or 3rd grade. I can't remember, but I had wrestled since 2nd or 3rd grade. And I was kind of a piece of shit, to be honest, like as a person. I was a very loud child. I was a very, look at me type of kid. I had anger issues. I wasn't the best in the classroom. I was a little bit of a troublemaker in certain senses, and I was also extremely overweight. I wrestled super heavyweights when I was in 3rd grade. I was 136 pounds in 3rd grade.
I gotta see pictures of that.
with a 90s bowl cut and everything, And so, and the only things that I really knew well were a half Nelson and a headlock. Because that's all the fat guys do, right? The best heavyweights, I'm sorry, heavyweights, but the best heavyweights are the ones that learn how to shoot. Yeah. Like, for real. And anyways, all I knew how to do was a headlock and a half Nelson. So that beginning of my career was kind of wasted because of who I was. Yep. When my parents divorced, I went really internal. There was some statements that were made to me by My brother, that really hit me hard when I was making it harder for my mom during this transition. We lost our house. We had to move to Iowa, right? The mothership when it comes to wrestling. There are a lot of people that will fight me on that one, say Pennsylvania is better, but Iowa is where it came from. Right? Yes. But anyways, I had to move out there, and it was kind of a way of my coping mechanism because I lived in a basement with, I think it was 7 women essentially. So I had my 2 sisters, my mother, my aunt, and her 3 kids. I don't know if I did the math there correctly, but I was the only boy, right? My grandma lived upstairs. All of us lived downstairs on these mattresses because they were going through a hard time at the same time we were going through a hard time. So we're living in my grandma's house, and I just could not effing stand being around all of them that much. So I was like, how do I get out of the house, And I ended up joining, well, I was already going to join the wrestling team, but what I ended up doing has been probably the best decision that I've ever made in my life, which was I started practicing with the high school in the morning, and then I wrestled with the middle school in the afternoon. So in 8th grade, I wrestled with the high schoolers, throughout the morning. So I would be doing 2-a-days, and I was doing it in Iowa, and Iowa practices are no joke. And I learned a lot from one coach in particular. His name is Coach Duff. I'll probably mention every one of my wrestling coaches. I hope that they all eventually watch this video, but Coach Duff had a extremely positive effect on me as a person. And you wouldn't expect it from a guy like him. He was the most stoic human of all time. I mean, he looked like a juggernaut, his big old cauliflower ears, and he didn't smile ever, You saw him mad, but you didn't see him smile. But Coach Duff would make us do these things called long hauls, for instance, where we had practice in the evening for 2.5 hours. And then he'd be like, all right, go grab your shoes, your running shoes. And he would open up the doors in the high school because everybody wrestled in the high school. Upper class was on this side, lower class was on this side, cafeterias in the center. He'd open up the doors, and there would be a hall that's basically 150 yards to one side and back in this big old high school. And we would have to run essentially till everybody on the team puked, right? You'd be doing wheelbarrows and partner carries and hops and carrying weights and leapfrogs and all the other bullshit, right? And in those long hauls, he would say certain things that just ring in your ears, like only the strong survive. I mean, it's cliche now. We didn't have Instagram at that point in time. All these things that all these influencers throw out there and all these motivational people, like it's like only the strong survive. And he would just say all these different things that would just kind of ring, and at the time you weren't listening to it because you were worried about you dying in the middle of this huge hall. It is awful. I mean, it gives you PTSD thinking about it. But anyways, that really played a factor. Playing with the coaches, wrestling in the morning and afternoon played a factor. But what was even more of an innate thing, I put so much time and dedication and discipline into my life at that point in time that my grades shot up. I was an A student from that point forward for the rest of my life. I mean, other than a couple of B's that I referenced in one of those videos, still pretty much burned me. Got captain awards in every sport that I did, so on and so forth. But I don't think that it would have really played as long into my life as it did if it wouldn't have been for what happened after the season was over. My mom had met my stepdad right before we had left. They were just friends, but they got to talking from a distance and so on and so forth. And she let us know we were going to be moving back. And I told my coach, and Coach Duff, right? Yep. Coach Duff.
Probably no neck.
No neck. And for the first time ever, he sat down next to me in an empty locker room, and he goes, I don't want you to go. I was like, what? And he goes, I've seen something change inside of you this year that should be fostered. It should be nurtured. It should absolutely be handled. I want you to live in my basement. Right. And I was like, this sounds like, I'm going to be a slave inside your house. But later, later down, I didn't think about it the same way as I did as I reflected later on. But I was like, my discipline, my will to never quit, my constantly showing up, my doing something that the other wrestlers wasn't doing, showed somebody that I thought to be the hardest human on the planet it made him break down and say something vulnerable in front of me, and that really changed a lot of stuff for me. So ever since that point, knowing with with that time that I had, going and doing this stuff, kind of because I just didn't want to be in the basement with all the kids, whatever. But it taught me discipline, it taught me focus, it taught me all these things, and knowing it played a true benefit to my life, I was like, I'm going to do this for forever. So turning down the critic inside of my head was as simple as understanding that if I believed in what Coach Duff believed, and I knew that there was something brighter at the end of all this pain and anguish and stuff that you learn inside the room, I'm going to be the champion of the world. I'm going to be something great if I just do that. If I apply that amount of work effort, or hard work and efforts and whatever else. If I do this for forever, I'm going to be something great. And it just made it easy for me to stay disciplined for a very long time. Fell off the rails later on in life, poor decisions and other things like that. But that stayed with me all the way through the majority of my college career. It was just understanding that you can do it, and it's going to pay a benefit to you.
So I think that one thing that stood out to me, which is something that I learned, I would say, into my early mid-20s as well, but I think you probably weren't aware of it at the time. I could be wrong, but the decision to be the small fish in a giant pond, right? Meaning, I don't want to be at home with 7 women, and I got to get out of here. So I'm going to go spend my time inherently putting myself around people who are much better than me, right? And maybe that wasn't the thought process at 12 years old.
Yeah, 12. Yeah,
probably
so maybe,
not. But like maybe that was a little bit of prodding from the man upstairs to, force some of that hyper defiant kid out of you. It's also interesting to me that, I don't obviously know anything about your biological dad, but I think that somebody who's investing into you, who you look up to, I always seem to look up to the guy that's the most stoic. Because in my head, I'm like, this guy's got it figured out. Right?
Sometimes.
Because they just seem almost at peace, right? Bo was very similar. You'd tell Bo, like, people would joke with him, they'd be like, smile, and he'd be like, this is my smile. Right?
I am smiling. I'm happy.
Right. But I think that, that's a very, whether it was on purpose or not, a very mature decision to make at that age, that I think has almost the most direct correlation to business or anything in life, whether that's spiritual growth, business growth, myself, recovery growth, etc. And it's a principle that was hammered into me by my mentors in business, is that you should always try to be the smallest person at the table. Right? You should always be surrounding yourself with people that have done what you're trying to do or have already mastered it.
If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Right. So I'm always, seeking that type of environment or people to be around, and I just usually sit there relatively silent and just observe, and apparently, or occasionally ask questions that are probably rather elementary questions to some of the things that are coming up. But I think that, like you said, the Jocko quote, discipline, his book, Discipline Equals Freedom, some of the things Joe Rogan says, I like the fact, Joe's podcast frequently references that he says, I constantly try to do very hard things and learn new skills that are very challenging because my brain tells me I can't. Right? Now, the freedom part of that discipline, while it seems, I'll reference one of my best friends, Rob, is a Navy SEAL. And when Rob got back from BUD/S, I was 23, he was 23, And I was like, dude, where'd the kid go that used to ding dong ditch with me and like egg people's houses and skateboard around town and cause trouble? And he was like, I don't know. He said, that's just not who I am anymore. It was like very matter of fact. I was like, okay. Right. And it took me a long time to understand Rob, but every single thing in his life was dialed in. His food, his sleep, his training, his studying, everything was completely dialed in. And looking at things, like watching his life, I looked at him and I would be like, everything seems to be easy for him. And he said, no, everything's very hard for me. The reason, or the only way that I can make these things easy is if I force myself to do the stuff I don't want to do, and I do it when I don't want to do it, which is what discipline is, right? And then over time, those things become pattern or habitual, right? And then the outcome is easy because I've minimalized all of these little tasks that I just try to avoid all the time. So the freedom of I think the freedom of discipline comes from understanding that you can literally do anything as long as you have the discipline to be a beginner and then to be intermediate and then to be advanced and then to be an expert.
Absolutely. I mean, well, some people have a leg up, but their leg up is actually like the vice at the same time. You saw that a lot in wrestling, especially at the collegiate level. There was people who skated by in high school, not skated by, they had phenomenal records, like 1, 2, 3-time state champs, whatever. They're just naturally a gifted wrestler.
Right.
But we talked in the last video about jumping off the ledge and challenging your mind into going further, becoming great, not just being good, becoming great. And they were the first ones off the team. Always. They were the ones with, our coach would regularly waste his scholarship dollars that he'd give out. Like the top 3 scholarships he'd give were 1, 2, and 3 out the door when we did Hell Week, right?
Right.
Coach, and he knew it though, right? Hell Week, he stole the name from the SEALs or whatever. But in college wrestling, we did Hell Week every year, and Hell Week. So we would start with 60 wrestlers or something like that for the season. And by the time we actually started the season, where it wasn't just conditioning and Hell Week, we would have like 30 to 35 every year, and a lot of them were the ones that came in with the scholarship. But where I'm going with that is from what you said, you can literally do anything if you put your mind to it. Simplified version of that, right? You can literally do anything you want to if you put in the reps and you have the discipline to continue to put in the reps. The good reps, the reps you don't want to do, training in the dark, all those other things that everybody talks about on Instagram. But it's like, if you put in the reps. So yes, you might have a leg up if you're gifted, just naturally a good athlete, naturally stronger, naturally quicker, naturally just understand how to flow and stuff like that on a wrestling mat or in any other sport. But the person who ends up being the national champion or the Olympic champion or whatever it is the one who just put the work in, regardless of if they did or didn't want to do it.
It's my favorite quote in the world. It was painted in 2-foot letters in my gyms. It's hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Right. And it's like that quote to me summarizes a lot of my life, because I was never really inherently gifted at anything. The only thing that I later found out in life that I had maybe a little bit of a leg up on was just natural strength, right? I was just naturally stronger than most of the people that were of similar size to me, which I put all my chips in on that for a while.
I'm gonna rest on that one.
But yeah, I mean, it's when it comes to anything, business success, business challenges, etc., that quote can ring true to any and everything. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I'm thinking of a specific example, which you can probably identify what I'm thinking of and how infuriating it is when you see somebody who has more talent than you in a certain arena and they waste it.
It's like the worst thing that you can witness in front of you. I mentioned in other videos, I know we're talking about wrestling, but I wanted to be a football player.
Right.
I thought that was the coolest damn thing on the planet, right? I thought being a football player would be awesome, right? And I'll see guys that either fell off in high school or fell off in college, or just never even tried, that are just absolute animals.
Right.
Just 6'5",
right,
300 pounds, 10% body fat, monsters. They wouldn't even have really had to try that hard, and they could have been in the league. Just stick them on the line and get in front of somebody, you know? It's just like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know? And then there's us guys that aren't just naturally great at things. And we're up there busting our ass, and it's like a slap in the face.
It is.
You know, it's like they didn't do it on purpose to slap us in the face. They're just lazy, and it pisses you off, you know? But yeah, that's about the worst. Well, let's take the conversation in more of a vulnerable position for a minute. What are the harshest things your inner critic tells you?
Ooh.
Ooh.
I mean, some things I probably can't publicize. I think that, and this comes from, being fortunate enough to be able to work with psychologists for 15, 20 years of my life, that most of the internal critic that all of us have is established between the ages of 2 and 9. Right. And we assimilate those statements and or judgments of ourself based on imprinting. Right. So one of the largest contributors or critiques that I have in my head all stem from imposter syndrome. That I am not worth what's around me, or I don't deserve what's around me, or I don't work hard enough, or quit being a lazy piece of shit, right? I'll tell you one that I'm battling right now in my head, right? So I have, as you know, I had my Achilles repaired 9 months or 8 months ago. So I'm basically cleared to do everything except for run as of right now. And part of my mental health routine is that prior to this injury, I wake up every morning at about 5 and I walk on a treadmill and read. And I've been cleared to do it for about 6 weeks now. I haven't walked yet. Right. And most of the time I get up in the morning and I'll shower. I'll still read, but while I'm reading, all I'm doing in my head is bashing myself because I'm being lazy. Right. And the only thing that's stopping me right now from going and getting on the treadmill is the excuse that I tell myself that I don't want to wake up the kids. It's never woken up the kids before. Right?
Yeah.
But it's funny because it's that game that your brain plays of like, I'm going to give you every reason not to do it. Right? So it's funny. I was just, when I was eating lunch, I was looking at some of my old training journals. Every time I look at those, I just get a little bit of a fire lit under me. Like, you do nothing now comparative to what you used to do.
Sure.
So I always call them an agreement in my head. And if I make an agreement, then I can't break it. Right. So I made an agreement with myself that I'll start doing that again on Saturday. Right. And the reason why I would not makes no sense, because I'm happier when I do it. I feel better. I'm metabolically healthier. But to the core of my being, my largest sin is sloth,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's where I'll always default.
Yeah.
What about you?
What about me? There's always been a lie that I kind of just, it's like I inherited it. So imposter syndrome, I'm always there. I'm
too.
there right now sitting in this seat. Like, why am I the guy sitting in this chair having this conversation? I wasn't a great wrestler, right? I was a 500 wrestler. I put in a lot of work, but I wasn't a great wrestler. Or in college, I was better in high school, but that's kind of a common theme, you know. But one of the biggest ones for me, definitely stems from my childhood. So I mentioned there were 4 kids, and there was a key difference in the way that my father acted towards me than how he acted towards the other children.
Me too.
I'm not gonna bash him here, and as I get further and further in my life, I understand how hard it is to be a good dad and still support the family at the same time.
Yeah.
But I know in my heart that I was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of how much my parents could deal with for stress financially, the burden of the bills and the kids and the chaos and all that stuff. I know, it makes me feel like I was a mistake, right? And that's really, it's carried a long way with me. So when I get into a position where I'm winning or I'm succeeding, my internal dialogue is, you got lucky. You weren't supposed to be here.
Because everything is a mistake if you're a mistake.
Right.
Right.
Right. So, it's difficult to silence those things. Getting around people who can affirm you in ways, I mean, you don't have to sit around, pepping each other up all day long, but people who understand you and who can, give you words of affirmation, even if it's not all vulnerable and that kind of stuff, is very valuable. Getting into a team environment where the idea is for everybody to succeed is very valuable. I think that's one of the bigger proponents as to why I like to operate this business the way that it is I want it to be an environment of growth, and I want it to be an environment where we're not going to give up on you. You're not here by a mistake. If you're in the wrong position, let's put you in the right position.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's a lot of things, even from the critic inside of my head, that make the way I live now the way that it is. Yeah.
It's funny you mention that, because there's a pattern that I've seen in you that in some ways I envy, right? Which I think comes from your mom. Just in the brief times that I've spent talking to your mom, understanding your mom, I think that, and as you've said, I mean, I think I'm quoting you directly, saying that you think that she was the epitome of what a mother should be. So one thing that I've learned, like, it's very difficult for me to genuinely receive credit or praise. It's even harder for me to give, because I was never given it. So giving it, like, I remember when I had my daughter and she could understand the words that I was saying when she was, 2.5, 3, it was very easy for me to tell her how proud I was of her and how good she was doing at something. But somebody that's not my biological kid, it's difficult for me to find that, because I never received it, right? What I've seen from you is that it's very easy for you to give praise. It's very difficult for you to take credit. Right? So, like, you want to give praise or credit or affirmation or prizes, presents, whatever. You want to give to everybody else around you, and then almost like kind of stand back in the corner and be like, but don't give it to me. Right? So, which I think stems from that imposter syndrome, or feeling like maybe all of this was a mistake.
Yeah.
Right?
Could very much be.
Yeah. which is why most of our personal conversations, when I'll send you things that I see from, people that I respect in business, that I'm affirming you in the sense of these people that are, multiple 100 millionaires or billionaires, and they're like, I have no fucking clue what I'm doing.
Right.
Yeah. And like, if there are problems or if this is going on at this stage, then you are exactly right on the right path, right? Is to like, I look at that as like a subliminal seed planting of like, you're doing great, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's just having this conversation and having to, I said, let's get vulnerable for a second, having to analyze the critic a little bit makes me realize I'm not fighting it as hard as I used to fight it.
Right.
Like on a wrestling mat, the critic is in your ear telling you to quit. In life, it's just in the background, letting reverberations of its voice echo off the walls of your head. You know what I mean? So I guess we all got to get back on the mat and start grinding a little bit.
I mean, there's to the physical side of it, there's nothing that I've found that's more useful to shutting that thing up than pure exhaustion.
I think that's why I loved CrossFit so much, to be frank, because CrossFit was an easy transition for me, because wrestling, one of the things that I found that I loved about wrestling was actually the exhaustion of it.
Yeah.
I wasn't talking to myself nearly as much. I wasn't thinking about all the chaos of the world nearly as much when I literally thought I was about to die out there, breathing and watching the lights fade in and out, because and
you could taste blood in the back of your throat.
Yeah, and so in CrossFit they call them fire breathers.
Yeah,
there's a that's just the term that they give to the people that just absolutely seem like they're some kind of different being. But the thing I know about me, and when I was a fire breather, I am not at this point in time. But when I was really competing and I was dedicated to it, and what I knew about each one of them is we liked the dark place, and it wasn't necessarily for the competition. It was to get out of our head.
Yeah.
100% of the time. I was like, I want to get back to CrossFit so I can go black out.
Yeah. It's like the purest, in my opinion, it's like the purest form of exposure therapy.
Yeah.
Right. It's like one of my favorite things that it's in David Goggins' second book, that he reads all of his haters' comments and records them on a voice recording, and he just records everything they say and he listens to it while he runs. Which, like, how sadistic and demonic is that? Yeah, but savage. At the same time, he said, I've ran out all my demons. I've beat mine. I need more now.
Yeah, bring it on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exposure therapy. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just an interesting thing. I know I like to challenge myself because I can narrow my focus to the exact thing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's the, I could never focus on anything other than, when I was the sport that I competed at the highest level at was powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting. And you can think of nothing else other than what you're doing with the bar when you're snatching 162 kilos.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Right.
Otherwise, it's just going to sit there.
And if you do just happen to have a thought of something else while you're executing the lift, you miss.
Yeah, you fail.
Right. So it's almost like a cleansing of, and it's the same reason to this day that I still seek, I still train when I go to the gym to the point of the fact that like my body will start to fail. Right. And it's not like failure reps in like bodybuilding. It's like my joints are shaking, right? Like I can't withstand anything more. I think I'm done for the day, right? I've completed what I came here to complete.
Yeah. It's funny, you just mentioned it. You walk into a wrestling room, you can pick out, or not the wrestling room, you can walk into a weight room, like your standard gym, you can pick out the wrestlers. Oh, they're the only ones with a wet shirt. It's like they haven't quite made it there yet. They're not failing yet. They're not shaking yet. So they're still out there just.
And usually like everywhere. Champion sweatpants.
Yeah. Tube socks.
Yeah, tube socks. Yeah. So, well, sweet. Well, I think that wraps up this one. I think third video, we're going to go into unrelenting forward pressure.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
We'll talk about Dan Gable a little bit more.
yeah.
How much better Iowa is than everybody else at wrestling.
Or just how much better Dan Gable is than every other human being in wrestling.
Right, absolutely. So, note to the audience, you are your worst enemy.
Yeah. And you usually will always be. But yeah, we hope you guys had a good Christmas, and look forward to the new year. Hopefully this video can help you set some resolutions to be a little less mentally frail. And we'll see you next time.